I never imagined I'd feel so invisible in my own family, yet here I am, standing in the shadows of the people I love most. My name is Whitney Stevens. I'm 32, and I've spent the past 8 years working as a financial analyst specializing in estate planning. It's ironic, really. I help strangers untangle their family's money and legal webs with care and precision, yet my own family's finances have always been a mess I'm quietly expected to fix. At every gathering, I'm the one who pays the bills, balances the budget, smooths over tensions nobody else wants to face. Last Thanksgiving, I covered half the catering bill, $800 out of pocket, without a word. Nobody even noticed. My mother, Amelia Ryan, is an expert at playing the victim. She's always the center of attention, demanding it like an unquenchable flame. If you don't give it to her, she guilt-trips you so thoroughly you feel like the worst daughter in the world. There's a way she looks at me, with a mixture of disappointment and entitlement, that makes me question whether I'm ever enough. Sometimes, late at night, I lie awake wondering if it's my fault, if I'm failing her somehow. But I tell myself to be patient, to keep hoping things will get better. After all, family is family. What nobody knows is the quiet power I hold, tucked away beneath layers of obedience and silence. I am the legal custodian of the most important documents: the deed to our childhood home, Grandpa's estate papers, the keys to what little financial security we have left. It's a safety net I've never thought to use. Not yet. Maybe I'm afraid of what would happen if I did, or maybe I believe in loyalty too much, despite the way I'm treated. Still, I watch and wait, my resolve quietly hardening every day. I'm not bitter yet. I'm just carefully watching. Sometimes I wonder how I ended up here, always the silent provider, the one who keeps things from unraveling while the rest of my family plays out their dramas. But I refuse to be a ghost in my own story. Even if I'm unseen now, I'm learning to see myself. And that might just be the beginning of everything changing. I can still remember the sting of that birthday party when I was 12. Mom had thrown a big bash for Lisa, balloons, cake, the whole neighborhood invited. But for me? Nothing. Not a card, not a song, not even a simple happy birthday. When I asked Mom why, she said coldly, "You're mature, Whitney. You don't need a party like your little sister." I tried to believe it was tough love, that I was just supposed to be grateful for what I had. But it felt like being erased. I swallowed the hurt and told myself it was okay, that maturity meant sacrifice. Lisa was always the golden child. New clothes, praise for every good grade, constant attention. I got the chores, the silent expectations, the ever-present guilt every time I wished for more. Our father, distant and disengaged, never stepped in to balance the scales. He let Mom's favoritism go unchecked, and for years I accepted it as normal. I told myself Mom's control was just her way of loving me. Hard, but necessary to keep us all in line. I watched Lisa bask in light and warmth, while I learned to be invisible, to survive on scraps of approval. One moment in particular still haunts me. I was applying to colleges and needed help with my essays. I went to Mom hoping for support, only to be brushed off with, "Lisa needs the resources more." That rejection cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't just the refusal, it was the message beneath it. I was less important, less worthy. I tucked that feeling away with all the others, burying it beneath the weight of responsibility and silent endurance. Growing up like that taught me to be practical, to put others first, and to keep my own needs quiet. It also made me stronger, even if I didn't realize it at the time. The memories aren't just scars, they're the foundation of who I am. I've learned to survive with dignity, but the pain still flickers beneath the surface, waiting for a light to ignite it. Since college, I've given more to this family than anyone knows. Over $30,000. It's more than just numbers on a spreadsheet or bills paid. I covered Mom's car loan when she couldn't, a $10,000 burden I took on without complaint. I filled the gaps in Lisa's tuition, $12,000 in total, because Mom saw her as the future, the shining star who deserved everything. I managed household bills, groceries, utilities, the invisible thread holding us together. I canceled vacations twice to cover emergencies, like the roof repair last year that cost $6,000 out of pocket. Daniel, my husband, watches these sacrifices with quiet concern. "Whitney," he said gently once, "when will they see your value?" His question hangs in the air between us, a reminder I don't want to face. But love keeps me giving, keeps me hoping that one day it will be recognized. Daniel supports me quietly, his worry unspoken, but clear. Lisa is always there, the favored sister, draped in Mom's attention and resources. It's a role I've played next to for years, always the giver, never the receiver. Yet I hold a secret power, one they don't know I possess. I'm the legal custodian of Grandpa's estate papers and the deed to our family home. Mom has no clue I control these keys to our legacy. It's a position I've never flaunted, never used, a quiet strength resting in my hands. The people in this story are all real to me. Amelia, with her calculated charm. Lisa, the golden child basking in favoritism. Daniel, my steadfast partner. And Janet Miller, the family lawyer who trusts me more than anyone else. Each plays a part in the tangled web of my life, a web I'm learning to navigate with more clarity and growing resolve every day. The first time Mom humiliated me in front of the whole family was at Lisa's engagement party. The room was buzzing with excitement, laughter, clinking glasses, until Mom decided to stir the pot. "You never did graduate with honors like your sister Whitney," she sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe that's why the inheritance went her way." The words hit me like a slap. I felt blood rush to my face, heat flaring in my chest. The room fell silent. Some guests chuckled nervously, others glanced away. It was like the air had thickened with discomfort. My mind raced. How could she say that? I worked tirelessly, sacrificed everything. But the sharp edge of her words cut through my defenses. I felt the familiar ache of being unseen, unappreciated. Yet, I told myself it must be the stress of wedding planning, that she didn't really mean it. I quietly excused myself, walking away instead of staying to argue. It was a small act of resistance, but it was enough to make Daniel catch up with me. His voice was a whisper, steady and kind. "You don't have to take that." In that moment, I realized something was shifting inside me. The old patience, the blind hope for peace, it began to crack. I wasn't sure where this would lead, but I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. Still, I clung to the belief that family could heal. For now, I left the room, my heart heavy, but my dignity intact. The first crack had appeared, but the foundation was still standing. The moment I turned to leave that stifling room after Mom's cutting words, I felt the cold weight of her eyes drilling into my back, a silent accusation that I was weak, unworthy, and beneath her notice. But what unsettled me more was what came next, the whispering. Not just anywhere, but right inside my family circle. Amelia had already begun weaving her web of distortion. A few days later, Aunt Margaret cornered me at a Sunday brunch with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Whitney, darling, you really must try to see it from your mother's point of view," she said, her voice syrupy yet sharp beneath the surface. "She's been so patient with you, but you've been, well, a bit too sensitive lately. Maybe jealous of Lisa's success?" The words landed like a slap I hadn't seen coming. In the days that followed, it felt as if the entire family had been primed to turn against me without explicitly saying it. I caught snippets of conversations when I thought no one was listening. Hushed tones calling me ungrateful, overreacting, even dramatic. Lisa, always the perfect little star, laughed a little too loudly at these comments, her eyes never quite meeting mine. I tried to reach out to family members to explain how wrong it felt, but they waved me off with placating phrases. "You should just let it go for peace's sake. It's not worth making a scene." Or worse, you're imagining things. It was as if my small resistance had triggered an avalanche of collective dismissal. Then came the phone calls from Mom, cold, calculated, and relentless. "Whitney, you're making mountains out of molehills," she'd say, her voice deceptively gentle but laced with condescension. "After all I've done for you, helping you whenever you needed it, and this is how you repay me? You just don't understand." Each call left me dazed, questioning my own perceptions. I began replaying every interaction, doubting if I was truly the victim or just the overly sensitive daughter Amelia kept telling me I was. Yet beneath the guilt and confusion, I sensed a cruel pattern. She wasn't just defending herself, she was isolating me, cutting me off emotionally and socially. Family meetings became minefields. Amelia would call them private gatherings, conveniently excluding me or ensuring I had minimal say. When I did manage to attend, the room felt hostile, the air thick with judgment and thinly veiled contempt. Eyes avoided mine, and voices hushed when I spoke, as if I were a troublemaker who had crossed an unspoken line. Daniel noticed this too. One evening, as we sat in silence after I hung up one of Mom's gaslighting calls, he said quietly, "Whitney, they're turning the family against you. You're fighting a war no one else wants to fight." His words echoed the sinking feeling I'd had for weeks. Was I really the problem? Had I become the villain in my own family's story? Despite the growing isolation, a small part of me resisted surrendering to despair. I clung to the hope that, somewhere beneath the facade of cruelty and manipulation, my family could see reason. But Amelia's refusal to accept my resistance hardened into something darker, more strategic. It wasn't just emotional control anymore. It was a campaign to erase me, to make me into a cautionary tale. Each whispered rumor, each cold shoulder, each veiled accusation was a calculated blow, chipping away at the foundation of my dignity. And as the walls closed in, I realized that this was only the beginning of a battle far more ruthless than I had expected. I planned to try peace once more. If confrontation had only served to deepen the divide, maybe a structured conversation would break the cycle. I reached out to Janet Miller, the family lawyer who had always been a quiet ally, and arranged a meeting, hoping her presence could mediate the growing tension. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, clutching the papers I'd brought. Records of how I'd managed the finances, evidence of years of support, and the legal documents proving the inheritance was intended for me, my heart hammered with cautious hope. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to lay out the truth calmly, to find a way back to family without bitterness. Mom arrived late, eyes rimmed red as if she'd been crying. From the moment she sat down, she wove her familiar narrative: sacrifice, hardship, and victimhood. "I've given everything for Lisa," she said, voice breaking. "You never see how hard it's been, Whitney. I had to make choices for the good of the family." Her tears felt rehearsed, a performance meant to sway rather than heal. I tried to hold my ground, explaining carefully, "Mom, the inheritance was set aside for me. I've supported this family financially for years, more than you realize. This isn't about jealousy, it's about fairness." Janet listened, nodding occasionally, but I sensed her growing discomfort. As the conversation unfolded, Janet's neutrality began to waver. Her words, once impartial, shifted toward a subtle defense of Amelia's decisions. "Family tradition often guides these matters," she said hesitantly. "Your mother's discretion, while hard to accept, might be rooted in protecting everyone's interests." It was a blow I hadn't expected. The person I had hoped would be an unbiased mediator was now aligning, albeit quietly, with the side that had dismissed me. I felt my voice falter, the weight of rejection settling over me like a dark cloud. When the meeting ended, I walked out feeling smaller than when I'd entered, swallowed by the cavernous silence of dismissal. Daniel met me outside, his eyes full of sympathy. "You tried," he said softly, wrapping an arm around me. Now it's their choice. The truth of his words stung. I had come with honesty and openness, hoping for resolution, only to find the door firmly shut. The family I had supported and loved refused to acknowledge my pain or validate my claims. That failure etched itself into me, a painful lesson that some battles aren't won with kindness or reason. If fairness was off the table, I would have to find another way. Weeks later, the humiliation escalated with a cruel precision that shattered any remaining illusions about Mom's limits. It happened at a charity gala, an event I had attended reluctantly, but with the hope of bridging gaps, surrounded by colleagues and family alike. The grand ballroom was filled with chatter, elegant dresses, and the clink of glasses. I felt the familiar tension of walking a line between professional and personal worlds, trying to keep my two lives separate. But that peace shattered when Amelia found her moment in the spotlight. Standing at the edge of the room, she raised her glass, voice dripping with condescension, but loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Isn't it funny," she said, eyes locking on mine, "how Whitney, the so-called financial expert of the family, can't even secure her own inheritance? I guess expertise doesn't always pay at home." The room froze for a heartbeat. Lisa smirked behind her mother, clearly enjoying the spectacle. The words stung, not just because of their cruelty, but because they echoed in the ears of my colleagues, people I'd trusted, people whose respect I had earned through years of hard work. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a mix of anger, shame, and disbelief. My professional reputation, something I'd nurtured with pride and care, was being dismantled in seconds by the woman who should have been my protector. Daniel's jaw tightened beside me. His fists clenched quietly, but he said nothing. The silence around us felt heavy, as if everyone was waiting to see how I'd crumble. But beneath the humiliation, something else flickered. A hardening resolve that said, "This wasn't an accident. It was planned. A calculated strike meant to break me in every possible way." As the night wore on, I retreated from the crowd, fighting back tears while trying to compose myself. The sting wasn't just about Mom's words. It was the cold, deliberate nature of the attack that terrified me. She was willing to ruin my standing, both inside and outside the family, to maintain her control. The cruelty was no longer hidden behind veiled comments or private gaslighting. It was public, raw, and unmistakable. In that moment, I understood that this was no longer just about family dynamics. It was a battle for my very identity and dignity. Desperate to salvage what little piece I could, I reached out one last time. I needed to try, to bridge the chasm that widened with every cruel word and silent treatment. Sitting in our small living room, I spoke softly but firmly to Mom during a rare phone call. "I want us to heal, Mom." My voice trembled, but I held to the truth. "I'm willing to forgive and move forward if you can acknowledge the hurt you've caused. I need honesty, respect, and fairness." The words felt heavy in the air, exposed and vulnerable. This was not weakness. It was the last olive branch from someone who had given everything and was still willing to believe in family. Her response was nothing short of brutal. "You're always so difficult, Whitney," she said, voice cold and clipped. "There's nothing you're owed. You've made this your problem, not mine." The finality in her tone was like a door slamming shut on hope. Lisa's voice, sharp and approving, cut in from the background. "You just don't get it, do you?" I pictured her smirk, the cruel satisfaction in her eyes. The vulnerability I'd shown was weaponized against me, twisted into proof that I was the one tearing us apart. I sat back, the phone still warm in my hand, feeling a deep, aching hollow spread through me. Daniel, watching me crumble silently, whispered, "You did everything you could." His words were a balm and a reminder that sometimes love isn't enough. I realized then that reconciliation was impossible without genuine change on their part, a change they were clearly unwilling to make. The line had been crossed, the illusions shattered. I wasn't just hurt or ignored anymore. I was declared the enemy. And in that painful clarity, a new resolve began to form, cold and unyielding. The path forward was no longer about forgiveness. It was about reclaiming my power on my own terms. The morning after that crushing phone call, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Each notification felt like a fresh stab. Messages flooded in from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months, some even years, all siding with Amelia. "Whitney, maybe you're just too sensitive," one text read, while another said, "Your mother only wants what's best for the family." The words echoed in my mind, cold and accusing, twisting my insides into knots. Another message from Aunt Margaret, disguised as concern, suggested I was isolating myself and making things worse. When did seeking fairness become such a crime? Even friends, people I thought I could trust, started pulling away. Their texts became sparse, their calls less frequent. One late afternoon, I caught myself staring at my phone again, the screen dark and unresponsive to my fingers trembling with doubt. Daniel noticed the shift immediately. "They're not seeing what you're going through," he said quietly, brushing a stray hair behind my ear. His steady presence was the only anchor in a sea of shifting sands. I wanted to believe him, but the gnawing question kept creeping in. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe all this pain, the constant feeling of rejection, was because I was too fragile, too demanding, or simply not enough. That question haunted me as I went about my day. The house felt emptier than ever, despite the usual buzz of activity. The silence screamed louder than any argument. I replayed Amelia's words, the coldness in her voice, the calculated smiles of those who had turned their backs. It was as if I was fading, becoming a ghost in my own life. Exhaustion dragged at my limbs, and yet sleep refused to come easy. Lying in the dark, I felt the weight of isolation settle deep into my bones. But beneath the suffocating loneliness, a flicker of something else stirred, a stubborn ember of defiance. I reminded myself of the nights spent working late, poring over spreadsheets and estate documents, the sacrifices I'd made quietly, often unnoticed. I thought of Daniel's unwavering support and Janet's quiet faith in me. If everyone else had turned away, I still had those truths. I might be alone now, but I wasn't broken. That small flame of resolve was fragile, but it was there. Somewhere beneath the doubt, beneath the hurt, I knew I wasn't going to disappear quietly. As the day bled into evening, I sat by the window, the fading light casting long shadows across the room. I whispered to no one. Maybe I'm the problem, but maybe I'm also the solution. It was an uncertain promise, a seed planted in the darkness that would soon grow into something fierce and unrelenting. The isolation was unbearable, but it was also a crucible, shaping me, breaking me down to build me stronger. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope not for peace, but for clarity. The call from Janet came unexpectedly, her voice calm but laden with urgency. "Whitney, I've reviewed some documents regarding your grandfather's estate. There's something you need to see." My heart stuttered uneasily as she explained. 3 years ago, Amelia had legally redirected the $15,000 left to me for graduation into Lisa's account. It was all there. Bank statements, signed paperwork bearing my mother's forged signature. I sat frozen, the sterile office walls closing in around me as I stared at the proof. Daniel squeezed my hand, his expression grave but steady, grounding me in the chaos. The betrayal wasn't just a financial blow, it was a gut-wrenching erasure. The money Grandpa had earmarked for me, a symbol of pride and recognition, had been taken without my knowledge, without my consent. Even worse, replaced with a lie that Lisa needed it more. I felt the sting of humiliation as the truth settled like ice in my veins. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act, an erasure of my worth, my place in the family. The realization didn't ignite rage. Instead, a cold, hard clarity took root. The fight was no longer about reclaiming money. It was about reclaiming my very existence from the shadows my mother had cast me into. Janet's voice cut through the silence. "This is serious, Whitney. It's a violation, and it changes everything." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The years of subtle manipulation, the constant gaslighting, it all crystallized into one undeniable truth. Mom's cruelty was a calculated control mechanism designed to erase me. The hope I'd clung to died quietly that day, replaced by a steely resolve. This was no longer about family drama. It was legal warfare. The quiet office suddenly felt like a battleground. Daniel's steady presence reminded me that I wasn't truly alone. Janet's professional detachment gave me a glimpse of the path ahead. If I wanted to fight, I had the tools and the allies. I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of years lift slightly, replaced by the sharp edge of purpose. The veil had been lifted, and I could no longer pretend. The next steps would demand everything I had, but I was no longer the frightened daughter begging for fairness. I was a strategist, ready to reclaim what was mine. That night, after Daniel had left for work, I sat alone in the study, the familiar surroundings suddenly feeling foreign. The soft lamplight illuminated the scattered papers and fading photographs I'd pulled from a drawer. Each photo was a fragment of a past I'd tried to hold on to. Smiling faces, family gatherings, moments I'd thought were genuine. Now, they felt like relics of a lie. I scrolled through old texts, rereading conversations filled with hope and coded apologies, my heart tightening with each word. The financial records lay beside me, stark evidence of trust broken time and again. Anger simmered beneath the surface, sharp and precise. For years, I'd hidden it behind a veneer of patience and understanding, hoping love would be enough to soften the edges of Amelia's cruelty. But now, the truth was undeniable. I had been blinded by my own hope, lulled into silence by years of manipulation. The pain was raw, but the anger was fiercer, a controlled blaze burning away the last remnants of denial. "Never again," I whispered into the quiet room, the words a solemn vow to myself. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the secret power I held, the legal ownership of estate documents, the deeds to property carefully maintained over the years. Those papers, once symbols of safety, transformed into weapons in my mind's eye. No longer just a safety net, they were tools to reclaim control, to push back against the erasure. The grief was still there, a dull ache beneath the rage, but it no longer paralyzed me. I wasn't a broken victim. I was a woman awakening to her own strength. I paused, fingers hovering over a stack of carefully organized folders, and felt a strange calm settle over me. This was the moment the scales tipped, when grief gave way to purpose and tears to resolve. I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't need reconciliation. I needed justice, and I was determined to pursue it on my own terms. The study's quiet was no longer a refuge for sorrow, but the war room where I would plan my next moves. I was ready to stop running from the pain and start wielding it like a weapon. The following evening, with the weight of the day pressing down on me, I sat across from Daniel in our dimly lit living room. The soft hum of the city outside was a faint backdrop to the intense conversation unfolding between us. "I'm done being the victim," I said, voice steady but low. "It's time to use what I have, the estate documents, the leverage, to hold Mom accountable." Daniel's eyes searched mine, filled with unwavering support. "You deserve justice," he said quietly, "and I'll stand with you every step of the way." We talked long into the night, sketching out a rough plan to target Amelia's manipulation through legal channels. Recovering the misappropriated funds was just the beginning. Securing rightful property rights would be crucial to dismantling her control. For the first time, the scattered pieces of my life felt like tools in a coherent strategy rather than fragments of pain. I shed the passivity that had clung to me for so long and embraced a strategic mindset, knowing that this would be a slow, painstaking battle. Janet Miller was already enlisted as an advisor, her expertise a vital pillar in what I now saw as a legal war. Yet the plan remained confidential between Daniel, Janet, and me. The less Amelia knew, the better. I felt a strange sense of empowerment settling in my bones, a readiness to fight not just for what was mine, but to reclaim my identity from the woman who had spent years trying to erase it. Amelia Ryan, whose narcissistic grip had tightened like a noose, was now the target. As we mapped out the first preparatory steps, I felt the familiar ache of loneliness soften, replaced by a fierce determination. This was no longer about family politics or emotional pleas. It was about justice. The battle ahead would be long and tough, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. Daniel's steady presence and Janet's quiet competence formed the foundation of a new chapter. I was ready to reclaim my life, no matter the cost. The path was clear, and I was poised for the fight. I started by laying everything out in front of me, like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blind to see before. The family dynamics, the financial dependencies, it all fit together in a pattern far more revealing than I wanted to admit. Amelia relied on me, even though she acted like she didn't. She depended on my knowledge of estate planning, on my quiet management of the money that kept this fragile system afloat. Lisa, for all her bravado, depended solely on Mom's favors and generosity, but had no idea how the legal and financial gears turned. The irony wasn't lost on me. The two women who'd tried to undermine me were utterly dependent on the very expertise I'd spent years building. That realization stung sharply, but also sparked a fire within me. Then, there were the debts. Amelia's hidden, mounting debts that I'd only just uncovered buried beneath layers of paperwork. Over $100,000 in unpaid bills and loans, some dating back years. I felt my throat tighten as I thought about how desperately she must be clinging to the family's money, not just out of greed, but out of sheer necessity. This wasn't just control, it was survival, at least from her perspective. It explained so much. Her frantic grip on the estate accounts, her manipulations, the lies. But it didn't excuse them. If anything, it made the betrayal more acute. How many times had I covered for her? Paid bills she ignored? Sacrificed my own stability to keep this house of cards upright? Janet was my anchor through all of this. We spent hours together, sifting through every document I could find. Contracts with forged signatures, suspicious transfers I'd never authorized, and irregularities in property titles that made my blood run cold. The family home deed was the biggest shock. It was legally in my name. I'd known I was the quiet keeper of the paperwork, but seeing it laid out like that, I realized just how critical I was to this whole family structure. They needed me more than I needed them. That thought echoed in my mind, louder with every passing moment. It was a source of power I'd never dared to embrace before, but now it felt like armor. I meticulously documented everything, every suspicious transaction, every forged signature, every manipulated clause. I wasn't rushing to act, though. This was a chess game, and I was positioning my pieces carefully. One wrong move and Amelia would know and tighten her grip even further. I had to be precise, deliberate. There was no room for impulsive decisions, no space for emotional outbursts. The truth was my weapon, and I was sharpening it with patience. As I sat in the dim light of my study, the quiet hum of the city outside felt distant, almost irrelevant. Inside, I was preparing for a battle that would change everything. The weight of what I was about to do settled over me, but it no longer crushed me. Instead, it fortified the resolve that had been growing quietly, steadily, beneath the surface. I thought about the years I'd spent invisible, overshadowed, and underestimated. Now, armed with facts and legal leverage, I felt a strange sense of calm confidence. They thought they controlled me, but the truth was far more complicated. This family, with all its tangled loyalties and betrayals, depended on me in ways they couldn't admit. That vulnerability was my advantage, my secret weapon. The realization didn't make me cruel. It made me focused. For the first time in a long time, I believed I could reclaim my place, not just as the silent provider, but as a force to be reckoned with. And so, quietly and carefully, I began to map out the path forward, each step measured, each document a piece of the legal checkmate I was constructing. The next days felt surreal as I moved through the motions of normal life, while my mind worked overtime behind the scenes. I changed passwords on every family financial account I had access to, locking down online banking, brokerage accounts, and even the safe deposit boxes Amelia had once controlled. I spent hours on the phone with Janet, instructing her to draft legal notices, to prepare documents that would soon be weaponized but were still tightly under wraps. Meanwhile, I kept my face calm and neutral around Amelia and Lisa, who chatted like nothing had changed, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath my composed exterior. At a family brunch, I smiled politely as Amelia monopolized the conversation, her voice smooth and practiced. Lisa leaned in, laughing exaggeratedly at every joke, clearly trying to butter me up as usual. They didn't suspect a thing. Daniel sat beside me, his eyes occasionally meeting mine, full of quiet admiration. "You're the calm in the chaos," he whispered when no one was listening, and I nodded, swallowing the turmoil that churned beneath my smile. This was my quiet rebellion, the calm before the storm, the poised silence before the first strike. I was a time bomb, but no one could see the ticking inside me. Back home, the nights stretched long and sleepless as I reviewed every document, every contract and clause. I cross-checked wills against bank statements, scrutinized property deeds, and confirmed every detail with Janet. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, but I welcomed it. It was grounding, focused. The family continued their usual games of favoritism and manipulation, but I was no longer a pawn. I felt like a player, moving pieces unseen, setting traps they would never anticipate. The tension in the air was almost palpable, a delicate dance between appearance and reality. I was ready to shatter the illusion when the time was right. But for now, the mask of normalcy was essential. One evening, while sorting through an old box of my grandfather's documents in the dusty attic, I stumbled upon something that stopped me cold. Tucked between yellowed papers was a thin, folded letter written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. My heart hammered as I unfolded it carefully. It was a codicil to his will, an explicit, handwritten instruction stating that the $15,000 graduation gift left to me was to be held in trust until I turned 30, untouched and protected from any reallocation. More than that, it forbade the trustee, Amelia, from moving or spending the money without my direct consent. My hands trembled as I read and reread the words, each sentence a dagger to the years of lies and betrayal. The shock was overwhelming, but it quickly gave way to grim satisfaction. Grandpa's trust had been deliberately concealed from me and Janet all these years, hidden beneath layers of deceit. The realization that Amelia had knowingly violated this trust, diverting my money without my knowledge or permission, transformed everything. The quiet, simmering battle I'd been preparing for suddenly exploded into sharp clarity. This wasn't just about money. It was about breach of faith, betrayal at the deepest level, and outright fraud. I held in my hands legal proof that invalidated everything Amelia had claimed. The weight of this discovery settled over me like a storm cloud. But instead of fear, I felt a fierce sense of vindication. The fight was no longer ambiguous. It was a clear moral battle, backed by Grandpa's explicit wishes. I could almost hear his voice in the stillness, a silent ally standing beside me. The hidden document exposed years of manipulation and deceit, a testament to Amelia's long-term plan to erase my rightful place. The stakes had just skyrocketed, and with that came a surge of urgency. I couldn't wait anymore. The legal clock was ticking, and I needed to act swiftly, but carefully. This twist had changed the game entirely. Later that night, I sat with the letter in one hand and my phone in the other, dialing Janet's number with trembling fingers. When she answered, I could barely contain my voice. "Janet, I found it. The codicil. Grandpa's letter." She was silent for a moment, then said, "Whitney, this changes everything. It's irrefutable. We have the smoking gun." I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from a fierce mix of relief and righteous anger. The path forward was now crystal clear. Justice wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to cross them. The next morning, with a calm I hadn't known I possessed, I sent the formal legal notice Janet drafted to Amelia. It demanded the immediate restitution of the $15,000 and an end to any unauthorized access to estate funds. I felt the weight of the moment settle heavily, but I knew this was just the beginning. The same day, I froze access to the joint family accounts I controlled, cutting off the financial lifelines Amelia and Lisa had taken for granted. I was careful, calculating. No dramatic outbursts, no public confrontations. My moves were subtle but decisive, a quiet tightening of the noose around Amelia's control. Almost immediately, the change was palpable. Bills I'd quietly covered for years went unpaid, the lights flickered briefly with delayed payments, and phone calls from service providers arrived at Amelia's door for the first time in a long while. The family began to feel the strain, though they couldn't yet name the source. Amelia's usual smooth facade wavered, her grip on the household slipping like sand through clenched fingers. Lisa's confusion was obvious, and I caught flashes of frustration in her gaze, but they still didn't see me as a threat, just as an obstacle they could try to maneuver around. Throughout it all, I maintained my composed exterior, polite, firm, unyielding. My interactions with Amelia were measured. I refused to be baited into arguments or emotional traps. Daniel watched with quiet pride. "This is the Whitney I always knew you were," he whispered one evening, his voice steady as we sat in the living room. His faith was a balm to my resolve, a reminder that beneath the calm lay a fire no one could extinguish. The subtle power shift was underway, even if the family didn't fully understand it yet. Amelia's attempts to deflect blame or counter the legal notices were met with precise, professional responses from Janet. I was initiating a legal checkmate, one carefully executed and without the spectacle they might have expected. The tension in the house grew, but I remained steady, the quiet architect of a reckoning they hadn't seen coming. This was only the first move, and already the balance of power was shifting in my favor. The family room felt stifling as everyone settled into their seats, forced by Amelia's insistence to gather once more under one roof. The usual polite chatter buzzed faintly, but beneath it, an undercurrent of tension rippled through the air. I sat quietly, my hands resting calmly on my lap, the weight of the folder containing the codicil and the financial documents pressing almost physically into my side. Amelia's eyes flickered to me intermittently, a mixture of suspicion and overconfident expectation etched into her features. Lisa sat beside her, feigning casualness, but her gaze darting nervously towards the papers I held. The extended family and Janet filled the room, their collective curiosity thick as they waited for the fireworks Amelia had promised. Taking a breath, I straightened and lifted the folder deliberately. "There's something I need to share," I began, my voice steady but carrying the quiet force of years of hidden grievances. "Mom, this money, the $15,000 graduation gift, was never your decision to redistribute." I slid the codicil onto the table where everyone's eyes could see it, the aged paper standing as undeniable proof. This document, written by Grandpa himself, explicitly states the funds were to be held in trust until I turned 30, untouched, except with my consent. I watched Amelia's face blanch as the words landed like a blow. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but no sound came. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that sucked the air out of the space. I could hear the faint rustle of papers and the subtle intake of breath as disbelief settled in. I continued, my voice firm but controlled. Alongside this codicil, here are the bank statements, the records of transactions that prove the $15,000 was moved and spent without authorization. This isn't speculation or accusation, it's documented fact. Janet's eyes met mine, a silent nod affirming the thoroughness of our preparation. The family shifted uncomfortably. Even Lisa's usual smirk faltered. From this moment forward, all estate decisions will be transparent, legally verified, and require my consent, I declared, feeling a surge of power ripple through me. I was no longer the sidelined daughter, the invisible caretaker. I was the rightful controller of the assets that had been manipulated and stolen. The air was thick with the shock of reversal, and Amelia's control visibly crumbled, her usual mask of dominance slipping away as reality crashed in. Whispers started to bubble from the extended family, expressions ranging from stunned respect to awkward avoidance. Amelia's eyes darted around, searching for an escape route, but the evidence was irrefutable, the moment irrevocable. I felt a fierce calm settle over me, the tension in my chest easing as I realized I had finally reclaimed the narrative. This isn't about revenge, I added quietly, but about justice and respect for the truth. The room held that moment frozen, a tableau of shattered illusions and newfound authority. As I sat back, the weight of years of pain giving way to a clear, resolute strength, I knew the balance of power had shifted for good. In the days that followed, the fallout was as swift as it was merciless. Amelia's carefully cultivated image unraveled before my eyes. Creditors, now aware of her unauthorized spending, demanded immediate repayment. Her calls and letters went unanswered as her financial obligations mounted, exposed by the very transparency I enforced. Family members who had once turned a blind eye began to distance themselves, their conversations tinged with doubt and disappointment. Amelia's once commanding presence dwindled to frantic, desperate attempts to patch over the cracks she'd created. She reached out to me and Daniel with frantic apologies, her voice laced with unconvincing remorse and promises to make things right. But I was no longer the pliable daughter. My reply was measured, cold. "I'm listening, but only when it's through proper channels," I told her firmly, a boundary as clear as it was unyielding. Lisa tried to step in, her attempts to smooth things over meeting a wall of polite but firm refusals. The family's social fabric, once held tightly by Amelia's manipulations, began to fray in awkward silence. Whispers circulated about her deceit, her desperate clinging to control now exposed for all to see. Janet's steady counsel reminded me to stay vigilant. Amelia would try to regain footing, but I knew I had fortified my defenses. Some relatives, once silent or complicit, reached out privately to apologize, their words hesitant but genuine. The slow but unmistakable crumbling of Amelia's world was both satisfying and sobering. I felt no triumphant glee, only a solemn recognition that justice was being served, and the toxic web of control was unraveling in real time. Amelia's desperation escalated in ways I had anticipated, but was prepared to meet with unflinching resolve. She launched threats of legal countersuits, trying to intimidate me and Daniel into submission. On social media, she played the victim, spinning narratives aimed at garnering sympathy and fracturing family support. Emotional blackmail flooded inboxes, targeting those still loyal to her, hoping to sway the tides back in her favor. Flying monkeys, family members caught in her web, pressed me relentlessly to forgive and keep the family together. Each message, plea, and threat was met with the same unwavering response: no engagement beyond legal boundaries. I refused to be drawn into her games again. A shaky voicemail arrived one night, her voice trembling with false contrition, demanding one last chance. I listened once, then deleted it without reply. My boundaries were no longer negotiable. Meanwhile, Some family members courageously reached out to me, offering genuine apologies and support. I accepted their words cautiously, aware that trust needed to be rebuilt slowly. Amelia's isolation deepened, her influence dissolving into echoes of past control. The legal shield Janet and I had constructed held firm, a fortress against all attacks. Watching the once dominant antagonist shrink into defeated desperation was surreal, but I stayed steady, unmoved. The years of pain had forged a resilience that no manipulation could breach now. 6 months later, the quiet peace I'd longed for settled over my life like a gentle tide. Daniel and I had grown closer, our connection strengthened by the shared trials and triumphs. Family gatherings were smaller, Amelia's presence limited and carefully monitored. I no longer felt dragged into the chaos. I chose when and how to engage, setting boundaries that protected my heart and sanity. The family home, legally mine, stood as a symbol of the life I'd reclaimed. Estate affairs were transparent and fair, conducted with open communication and respect. Amelia faced lasting consequences, financial scrutiny and diminished influence, but I sought neither vengeance nor destruction. Justice was enough. Sitting quietly one evening, I reflected on the journey from hopeful daughter to empowered woman. The approval I'd once craved from Amelia felt hollow now, a distant echo I no longer chased. Peace, I realized, was worth far more than any inheritance or approval. The house was no longer a battleground, but a sanctuary. The future lay before me, unshackled and bright, mine to shape on my terms. The long fight had closed, but its lessons and strength remained, steady in my heart. I was free, finally free.